Okay, good afternoon. This is Richard Hsu, host of Hsu Untied. Today I'm very pleased to have with me as my guest Derek Zaba, who's a partner at Sidley. Derek, welcome to the program.
Thanks, Richard. Good to be here.
So, Derek, you have one of the more interesting and unusual majors, at least for lawyers. It looks like you have a degree in mathematics, and you were participating in a very interesting contest, which I have no idea about. But maybe you can just start by telling me how you chose math as a major in the first place.
Yeah, sure. I mean, there was an easy choice for me. I think growing up, math had always been a place where I excelled. It's something I enjoyed. It's something I sought out. So I knew I was going to do something that was numeric,
Hmm.
empirical, quantitative, analytical, something in that general realm.
Hmm.
And also had, my father owned his own business, so I did have a kind of a corporate commercial inkling or desire to have that as well. So I went to when I went to college, it was easy to gravitate towards what I ended up in, which was an applied math degree
Oh,
out
okay.
of the engineering school. And then from there, went on to a variety of roles that were not solely mathematical. So it kind of fit with just the way I grew up, what I was good at, and what I was exposed to.
Did you have any particular career goal when you got to college or not really?
No, it was just that general sense that there would be some analytical
Uh-huh.
part of, the business world writ large, but it wasn't a specific, career choice or anything like that. And when did my undergrad, I also got my MBA in finance, which
Okay.
obviously makes sense given the quantitative background. So
Yeah.
it all really tied together for me.
Okay. Well, tell me what the CoMaP International Mathematical Contest in Modeling is.
Sure. There's actually two different mathematical contests in modeling. At least there were when I went to school, and they were global applied mathematics contest, where each of them would give you a problem to solve. And you have a small group with like three people. They would give you a problem on maybe a Thursday, and you had to turn it in on Sunday evening.
Huh.
So it was given across the globe, and people would pick. I think they give you two problems. You got to choose one.
Huh.
And the winner of one problem was like the CoMap, and the winner of the other problem was the other, SIAM or something like that, winner. So there were two different problems.
Huh.
And so you would get the problem once a year. You'd sit down with your group, you try to work through it, you put together a brief paper on it, and turn it in within 3 days, something like that.
Wow,
So it was
interesting.
a
And
really
you
intense,
and you
like
won this twice or something like
we
that?
did, yeah. At that point, it was the only team to have won it back to back.
Wow.
Maybe that's been probably that somebody's done that since, but at that point there was nobody else done back to back. So it was two different problems in 2 different years that
Wow,
we were
interesting.
successful.
Now, I assume more than one person, more than one team gets the solution. It's a question of how elegant the solution is, or
Yeah, well, it's again it's applied math, so there isn't really a solution. So I can give you, an
yeah, give me an
example.
example. Yeah.
So back then was as you might recall, Jurassic Park was out, and there was a big, emphasis on dinosaurs. They were in a lot of different places, and so the problem that we chose one year, they had, there's a Velociraptor, and there's whatever its prey is, I forget. And the Velociraptor has these parameters: speed, turning radius, and here's what the prey has. You know, what is the optimal strategy, or what is the likelihood of, the Velociraptor capturing its prey, and so
Huh.
capturing its prey. So you had to, like, you had to build a model as
Huh.
to you taking these two variables, and you figure out based on that, which is really kind of computational math, or at least math that you can, have a solution to there. But then and we added some randomness. So, there's within each attempt, a predator goes for his prey, and this is a chase predator, right? So like some predators are hidden predators, they surprise like a spider and like grab something. But when you're a chase
Hmm.
predator, you got to be faster. If you're not faster, you're never going to catch anything, right? So that was clearly the case. And you build this, you add a little bit of randomness. Remember going to the library in the zoology department, looking at, patterns for prey catching predators and how it all works, and how many times, because predators get tired. If you don't get it the first time, sometimes you don't get third, three times, and they give up because they need to conserve energy. And so
Hmm.
based on all of that, we put together a model, and then we ran simulations along various ranges for the parameters that we thought were reasonable to come up with an probability of success and optimal strategy for the predator going after its prey. So there wasn't an actual solution. It
Yeah,
was
right.
really any you can do with it what you want. Like, how would you analyze the problem, and how would you recommend to your friendly neighborhood velociraptor how to go after its prey?
So you write a paper or something like
Yeah,
that?
that's
Okay, yeah.
exactly right.
And do you
That's
submit
exactly
the
right.
program that you use? Because there's a computer,
Just the
just the
paper.
paper.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Back
Okay.
then, I mean, nowadays it may be different, but back then,
Yeah.
so we'd ran the simulations, and then you would have all the charts and graphs from the simulations to
Mm.
show why
Oh.
you're recommending what you're
Mm.
recommending.
And so what's it, how, what's it, so what's the, how is it graded or how is it judged? Is it based on the complexity of the model or
You
how
know,
is it
it's
judged?
funny. It's funny that you say that because the problem the other year that we wanted had to do with grading. And
Hmm.
so, you have how many what is the best strategy to optimize, grading? You have so many students, so many teachers. You don't want to have too, overgrade and just take too much capacity, but you want to get it right. And so we introduced some randomness in the teachers because precision wasn't 100%. You grade the same paper a couple times, it might not be the same. Teachers have bias. And based on all that, we came to a single solution. So
Hmm.
maybe they were using that first year to figure out the best way to grade these things in the second year they're on. But
Interesting.
but I think it was a group of tens of folks, I would think. I'm not
Yeah.
100% sure that would go through and kind of pick the winners. And maybe when they had the top five or so they thought were close, maybe they had some committee process. But I think it was something like that. I don't remember it being all that transparent, but that's
Yeah.
what I envisioned it was,
Huh.
something like
Is there
that.
like a first and second or third place or it's just the winner and that's it?
Wow, you're really testing me. I mean, this was almost 30 years ago. I don't. I think there was one winner in each, but I could be wrong.
Okay.
I
Huh.
do know in one of the years we got invited to present it at the national conference for Colmap or
Hmm.
Siam or
Hmm.
something like that,
Hmm.
which happened to be
Hmm.
at Stanford, which is,
Hmm.
10
Hmm.
minutes from where I
Hmm.
live right
Hmm.
now.
Hmm.
So that was neat. So I know we were, number one and maybe there was a tie, but that was a great experience when you're a college student to be able to present that at a mathematics
Now,
conference.
is this something today that could be solved by artificial intelligence?
Well, that's a good question. I think, and that was the department that held artificial
Yeah.
intelligence back then. So it was, it was a lot of research, and I did a little bit with neural networks, which
Oh,
were
yeah.
obviously much more simplistic and limited 30 years ago than what they can do today. I'm not sure. I don't know. I don't know whether this is an artificial intelligence type of solution. It seems like it's simple enough, but yet not a clear answer enough that it certainly could help if not find the answer.
Yeah, yeah. Well, after winning this contest back to back, what made you decide to go to law school?
Well, I went out. So from there I went to Capital One,
Mm.
which I'm not sure how many people know this, but Capital One was really two guys that came from a consulting firm that in the 1980s saw that all these credit card products were priced the same and they had clunky IT systems, so they couldn't make decisions very well. And they put together a company that could basically, there's tons of data in credit cards because there's tons of people that could put together all the data and you can run tests and different products, see what worked, and you can move quickly to disrupt the market. And that's how we got actually the 9.9 teaser, the transfer rates of 0% were all Capital One innovations
Hmm.
in what was a stodgy industry before that. And so the pitch from Capital One was, look, if you go anywhere else in the corporate world in a similar job, it's going to be you have to convince somebody you have good judgment, you have to have experience, and they have to trust your judgments. It's be years before you make a decision. Here, we have all the data in the world. If you can put together a good analytical case as to why something over the other, we don't
Hmm.
have to trust your judgment, right? We'll
Hmm.
see the data and we'll make that decision. So you can make an impact right away. And for somebody with my background, that was a very, compelling place to be
Yeah.
that young and be able to put in a position where you can kind of run things and make decisions despite having, not as much experience that would need it if you didn't have the data. So that was where
Yeah.
I went afterwards. I went back to law school. There were a couple of reasons I went back. One is law was always interesting. I wasn't 100%. I was ever going to law school. It wasn't like I have to go to law school. It's just one of the things that was always been on the options. I
Hmm.
had gone to business school already.
Hmm.
I figured, in this world, it's only getting more legally complex. So regardless of where I end up, and I didn't think I'd end up as a lawyer, having a law degree could only help. It certainly couldn't hurt, could only help. And it was, I went out here at Stanford where it was again in the late 90s where Silicon Valley was the center of the
Oh.
universe. So all of those things kind of put together that caused me to
Hmm.
end up out here for law school and put me down this path. Where I actually, after law school, I was a lawyer, and then I wasn't a lawyer for 15 years or so.
Oh,
So
really?
12 years or so, and then I came back to be a lawyer. So it's been a
Oh,
pretty
interesting. Well,
circuitous route for
tell me
me.
about that hiatus and how you went back to law, how you started
Yeah.
and but left and came back.
Yeah, and all of the things that I did since law school really relate to what I do now, and we can talk about exactly what I do now. But So I was at Wachtell Lipton for a couple of years, and that
Hmm.
was in the kind of the mid 2000s in the one of the big, I say heyday, but one of the big upswings of private equity back when they were talking about LBOing Dow Chemical for $15 billion, and that was a credible thing to consider. And
Yeah.
so it was pretty intense. It was interesting, but it was very intense, and it was also the time where there were job openings in the hedge fund in the private equity world, which I think at that point I thought made a lot of sense for me. So I ended up at a hedge fund, and this was really the heyday of hedge funds. Like private
Wow.
equity's come back, but this was the heyday of hedge funds. So I was at a hedge fund, kind of investing in companies that were undergoing, you know, basically process investing. So we would invest in companies that were undergoing hostile M&A or activist situations. Where companies where there was a litigation where you had to understand the litigation process. So
Hmm.
investments were really the kind of the legal background and the analytical thinking played a big role in the investment rather than
Hmm.
just looking for things based on value or what other criteria. So it was really a combination of all of that. I did that for a few years before I moved. That was in New York. I moved back out here to the West Coast. My wife is a doctor, and she went to residency out here at Stanford. So I came back here. I partnered up with another gentleman who had formed an activist firm. And
Hmm.
so from I was a partner in an activist firm for a couple of years,
Wow.
or started out and then was eventually named a partner in the activist firm for a couple of years. So I was in a non-legal capacity. This is an investment capacity, and was either in charge of or was part of the push in actually prosecuting the activist campaigns.
Hmm.
So did that whole, was that whole that side of the aisle. And then maybe it was after 3 or 4 years, I came across this firm called Camberview Partners. And Camberview at that time was formed by the people who formed the governance teams at BlackRock, Vanguard, State Street, which are, three of the big investors that really dictate a lot of the outcomes at a shareholder vote, and certainly in activism and M&A, but really kind of broadly. And way back then, having been an activist, it was a real question of how they voted. How do they make decisions? How do you get them on their side?
Right.
And these people who had built those teams formed a consultancy
Hmm.
in order to advise companies on how those institutions think. And it was
Hmm.
really, at that point, unique, proprietary, and I could see how valuable it was because that was something that we struggled with when I was at the activist firm.
Hmm.
So I was there for a while. I led the active by the end, I led the activism and corporate defense practice there for a few years. It was acquired by an investment bank, and that's when I decided to look around at all the things I could do. And my partner here, Kyle Fed, had built a tremendous practice that was at Sidley at that point. I had worked
Hmm.
with, a lot of the people that had done this and knew them because I was in these various roles, and I'd worked with Kai, and what he had built and the way that this practice is built was just very different and
Hmm.
appealing. And so there were a lot of, I kind of looked at it like a business too. I'm a hedge fund guy, so I looked at like barriers to entry and all of these various, reasons why I thought this business was going to be successful. And so I partnered with him, joined Sidley, partnered with him, and we've just been, exploding the practice ever
Wow.
since. And so
Interesting.
that's how
Interesting.
after what is that, about a 15-year hiatus, I was at a
Yeah.
law firm. And when I tell this story, all the law students are jealous because I was a junior lawyer for 2 years. I skipped all the parts in the middle and came in as a partner at the end. And so I
Yeah.
tell them it's not replicable, but it really worked out for me.
So interesting. So, what is your practice now exactly, and how do you knit all your experiences into it, or do you knit all them
Yeah,
into your
no,
experiences
and
now?
I do, and it's some of them are obvious, like a lot of the being the activist side is obvious, and some are less obvious, like the mathematics. But what I do is we are on the defense side of shareholder activism. So a shareholder activism is what a shareholder in a public company raises their hand and it wants to make some change, and the ultimate weapon that they have is the forcible change of the board of directors through what's called a proxy contest at a shareholder vote.
Yep.
Right, so that's what we do. We help companies that go through these processes, right? When an activist has gone through it, generally they've been through it many times and they know what they're doing, and they use advisors, but they can do a lot themselves. Most companies, it's the first time they're through it, or maybe the second time they're through it, but it's not what they do, right? It's not
Yeah.
their job
Right.
like it is for the activist. And so they hire a team of advisors. We occupy the legal sleeve. There is a banker, as a PR firm, but we operate in the legal sleeve and really help companies. And I'd say, and this is the reason why I was able to be hired as a partner with 2 years of legal experience, direct legal experience,
Yeah.
was that most of what I do, I would say, is judgment, tactical negotiation, positioning, right? There are certainly a heavy legal component, but if I think about like where I spend my time or the advice I get or the questions I get, maybe a third of them are really legal related,
Hmm.
and two-thirds are just, judgment, tactical, what should we do, all of that. And
Mm,
so that was the only type of partnership that I could possibly get, going
mm,
into a law firm was a
mm,
practice like that, which happened to be something I had experience with for the past 20 years at the time that I joined.
mm,
Um, so it brought together like a lot of the experience that I had. But in terms of the math piece of it, I think it kind of ties back to what I said about Capital One, and is that, when you're essentially an advisor to boards of directors, CEOs, general counsels at a high level where you're making, big decisions, right? One thing that's just absolutely critical to be good in that is you have to have good judgment,
mm,
right? That you have imperfect information, you see pattern recognition from other things that you've seen, all of that. You really have to be able to take all of that and make good judgments. And one of the things that's really helpful, and I think a real differentiator for me being in a legal practice with my background, is there are certain parts of that judgment which can be replaced by the analytics, by the empirical, right?
mm,
So similar to Capital One, where you can take judgment off the table and because you have the data, and so you don't have to trust somebody's judgments. It's not
right.
easy giving opinions just based on judgment, right? You might be right 70% of the time. If it's legal, you want to be right, sometimes 99.9% of the time. But it's much easier if you have really good data, precedent situations, you sweet it out, what wasn't relevant, and you can come to a conclusion. You don't have to, the judgment isn't as necessary, or it informs your judgment if it's part of a complex problem. So I think having the data in the world that I live in is just absolutely atrocious, right? It
Mm,
is there's people look at voting data as an example. They look at voting data for activist situations, but there's only 25 situations that go to a vote every year. It's
mm,
not representative of the 500 activist situations. It's limited sample size, so you could have a couple of campaigns that if they had settled, and a couple of campaigns that if they hadn't settled and came to vote, the takeaways that people take from that data would be completely different.
mm,
And so you have to be very careful. It's what conclusions you draw from the data, but having that ability to be able to take what is really messy and incomplete data and have some sort of conclusion that I can trust based on that
mm,
is very helpful in delivering that type of advice to a client, because
mm,
it's like I said, it is a unique skill set. It's kind of happenstantially how I ended up being back at a law firm, but I do think it really
mm,
helps out in providing that type of service to the client.
mm. You're like the money ball of your business.
I loved Moneyball, and I would say that I'm as close to it as it can be, but it's still
Mm,
not that close.
interesting. Well, now that you're back at a law firm, do you miss any of the other jobs you had, either being at a hedge fund or being an activist shareholder yourself or anything like that? And could you
Well,
see yourself ever going back?
I love this job. So I really enjoy it. I think there's a lot of pieces that are interesting and about it. So I do enjoy it. I don't really, people, when you're used to, when I get to Sunday night of Monday morning, I think it'd be like, oh, it's Sunday night. Now I don't feel that way.
Uh-huh.
It's Sunday. I'd rather it be Friday, but Monday's good too because I enjoy what I do. So I don't have any, but if I think about what, the parts of the other jobs I do miss, like it is one thing being a principal versus being an advisor,
Hmm.
right? It is one thing having the ultimate decision, being able to just make decisions quickly, not having to convince people, be having like, your skin in the game more directly. So that piece was more interesting, I think, when I was on the, activist side.
Mm,
And there's also, it is surprising that I didn't end up in a more directly quantitative place. And so
mm, mm,
I do enjoy getting into a spreadsheet from time to time and, analyzing the data and talking to folks and debating. And there isn't as much of that at this point, right? We have associates, we have paralegals that do a lot of that type of work. So there are pieces, and no job is perfect, obviously, but I really like mine. But those are a couple of the pieces that I do miss from the other jobs.
Could you solve a differential equation today?
Doubt it. If it was very simple, I could do it in a long period of time.
Well, Derek, this has been a fascinating conversation. I really appreciate your taking the time to share your story. Congratulations on all your success, and thanks again for doing this.
Thank you. Thank you. It's great to be here.
This is Richard Hsu and Derek Zaba. Thanks.